In early 2026, an unusual message began circulating online. It came from a supposed extraterrestrial civilization known as the Yael, and what they claimed was extraordinary. This was not simply another message saying, "We are coming." It contained something much more specific, a timeline. The year was 2026. And according to the message, sometime around June, July, and August, official announcements connected to extraterrestrial disclosure would begin to emerge. Government institutions, military insiders, political figures, and eventually the public. The message suggested that humanity would begin receiving more open confirmation that we may not be alone. But there was one problem. That prediction was made at the beginning of 2026. And now, we are already in August. So the question is simple. Did the prediction come true? But first, who exactly are the Yael? In mainstream science, there is no verified evidence that a civilization called the Yael exists. The name primarily appears within extraterrestrial contact and channeling communities. According to messages published by Era of Light, the communications are attributed to an entity called Tahinio, described as a representative of the Yael civilization. The messages describe the Yael as a highly advanced civilization associated with consciousness, advanced technology, interdimensional travel, and humanity's future evolution. They speak about frequencies, consciousness, wormholes, teleportation, and even the possibility that humanity has already encountered technology far beyond our current understanding. But there is an important distinction. None of this has been scientifically verified as extraterrestrial communication. So in this investigation, we are not going to present the Yael story as fact. We are going to examine the claim, and then we will compare it with what we can actually verify. On January 28th, 2026, one particular Yael message attracted attention. It discussed extraterrestrial disclosure, hidden technology, and humanity's supposed relationship with advanced civilizations. According to the message, governments may have been aware of extraterrestrial craft for decades. It even claimed that some advanced technologies may have been studied or reverse engineered. But the most interesting part wasn't the technology. It was the timeline. The message suggested that official announcements connected to extraterrestrial disclosure could begin around June, July, and August of 2026. That is a remarkably specific claim, because now we can actually test it. The prediction was made, the timeline was given, and 2026 is already here. So what really happened? So what exactly were the Yael predicting? When we break the message down, several ideas appear. First, extraterrestrial disclosure will become increasingly open. Second, people inside governments and political institutions would supposedly begin revealing more information. Third, military insiders and members of Congress would become more willing to discuss extraterrestrial subjects. And fourth, official announcements could begin appearing around the summer of 2026. But there is another important detail. The Yael narrative does not describe disclosure as one dramatic event. It describes a gradual process, a slow release of information, more sightings, more discussions, more government statements, more public awareness, and eventually a much larger revelation. In other words, disclosure would not necessarily happen in one day. It would happen step by step. But the Yael story goes far beyond disclosure. Their messages also contain extraordinary claims about technology, anti-gravity, alternative energy, pollution removal technology, interdimensional portals, wormholes, and technology supposedly connected to manipulating space and time. According to the narrative, humanity may already have access to some of these technologies, but they remain hidden from the public. If that were true, it would completely transform our understanding of human technological history. It would mean that some of the greatest scientific breakthroughs of our civilization may have come from knowledge that was never publicly acknowledged. But there is a major problem. Where is the evidence? At this time, there is no independently verified scientific evidence demonstrating that humanity possesses extraterrestrial technology of this kind. So once again, we have to separate the extraordinary claim from the evidence supporting it. But why 2026? Why this year? That may be one of the most interesting questions in the entire story. The January message focused on the summer months of 2026. Then on February 5th, another Yayo message went even further. It described 2026 as a major year for disclosure. And according to that message, the number of unexplained objects or spacecraft visible in the skies could increase toward the end of the year. So this was not simply one isolated prediction. The year 2026 appeared repeatedly. And now look at where we are. June has passed, July has passed, and August is already underway. Which brings us to the obvious question: where's the disclosure? So, did the Yayo prediction actually come true? If we define disclosure as an official government confirmation that extraterrestrial civilizations exist, then the answer is no. There's been no verified announcement proving that extraterrestrial beings are communicating with humanity. There's been no confirmed revelation establishing the Yayo as a real extraterrestrial civilization. But there is an interesting complication. The Yayo narrative describes disclosure as a gradual process. So supporters could point to UAP discussions, government hearings, military testimony, unexplained aerial observations, and the growing public interest in extraterrestrial life. They could argue that these events are pieces of a larger disclosure process. But that is an interpretation. It is not proof, and that distinction matters. Because almost any event can be connected to a vague prediction after the fact. The real question is whether the prediction made a testable claim, and whether reality actually matched it. And this brings us to a much bigger problem. How do you actually test a prophecy? Imagine someone says, disclosure will happen in 2026. It sounds specific, but what exactly counts as disclosure? A government announcement? A new UAP hearing? A leaked document? A UFO sighting, a military witness, or simply more people talking about extraterrestrials? If the definition is broad enough, almost anything can be interpreted as fulfillment, and that creates a serious problem. A prediction should have a measurable outcome, something that can be tested, something that can succeed or fail. Otherwise, the prediction can always be reinterpreted, and that is why we have to be careful. Because believing a prediction is not the same thing as proving it. And now we arrive at the most interesting moment, August 2026. The original Yayo message pointed toward June, July, and August as a period when official announcements could begin. That makes the current moment particularly interesting, because according to the literal interpretation of the prediction, something significant should already be becoming visible. But has it? So far, there is no verified extraterrestrial disclosure that confirms the Yayo prediction. However, the February message pushed the timeline further. It suggested that disclosure could continue developing throughout the rest of 2026. That means the story is not finished yet. If the summer period was only the beginning, then September, October, November, and December become the next part of the test. And that creates a fascinating question. What happens next? But there is a darker problem. What happens if nothing significant occurs? What happens if 2026 ends, and there is still no official confirmation of extraterrestrial contact? One possible response would be simple. The prediction was wrong. But another possibility is much harder to challenge. People could say, disclosure already happened. Humanity misunderstood the message. The timeline changed. Humanity was not ready. Disclosure happened in a different form. And suddenly, the prediction becomes impossible to disprove. This is known as moving the goalposts. The conditions change whenever reality fails to match the original prediction. And if that happens repeatedly, the claim becomes impossible to test. That is why one question matters more than anything else. Can this prediction actually be proven wrong? If the answer is no, then we may be dealing with a belief system rather than a genuine forecast. But dismissing the entire story would also be too simple, because something really is changing. Humanity is becoming more comfortable discussing the possibility of extraterrestrial life. UAPs are being discussed more openly. Military witnesses have come forward. Governments have investigated unexplained aerial phenomena. And the public conversation has moved far beyond the old image of UFOs as nothing more than science fiction. But none of this proves that extraterrestrials are here. It proves something different. The conversation itself is changing, and perhaps this is what the Yayo messages are actually describing. Maybe disclosure isn't a single announcement. Maybe it is a gradual transformation of how humanity thinks about the possibility of life beyond Earth. Or maybe the entire prediction is simply a coincidence. At this point, we do not have enough evidence to know. So, did the Yayo really predict extraterrestrial disclosure in 2026? Or are we simply connecting a vague prediction to events after they happen? In January, the message pointed toward June, July, and August. In February, another message described 2026 as a major year of disclosure. And now, we are living through the year they identified. There is still no verified evidence that the Yayo are an extraterrestrial civilization. There is no confirmed evidence that their messages came from beings outside Earth. But there is something we can test. There is a prediction. There is a timeline. And there is still time left in 2026. If something extraordinary happens in the coming months, people will undoubtedly return to these messages. But if nothing happens, then the credibility of the prediction becomes much harder to defend. And perhaps that is what makes this story so fascinating. We don't have to decide today whether the Yayo are real. We simply have to watch what happens next. Because if 2026 really is the year of disclosure, we may not have to wait much longer to find out. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe they were early. Maybe disclosure never meant what we thought it meant. Or maybe something really is coming. For now, there is no verified evidence that the Yayo are an extraterrestrial civilization. But there is a prediction. There is a timeline. And now, we are living inside it. So watch the sky. Watch the headlines, and most importantly, watch the evidence. Because sometimes the most interesting mysteries aren't the ones we can prove, but the ones that leave us waiting for what happens next. This is the crystal mind. We listen to the story first, and then we search for what is really behind it.